From kidnapping an assistant to firebombing a rival's car to allegations of severe beatings and disgusting sex acts, so far in Sean Diddy Combs' criminal trial, there have been bombshell pieces of testimony, including those moments that may end up sending him to prison for the rest of his life. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It has been quite a 3 weeks of testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs federal sex crimes trial, to say the least. We have charges that he is facing of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, prostitution, the main allegation being, of course, that Combs operated this criminal enterprise that was engaged in a pattern of criminal activity like kidnapping, arson, forced labor, drug trafficking, sex trafficking. And when you talk about sex trafficking, because he's facing those individual charges as well, the idea is that he used force, fraud, coercion, threats to induce women into these sexual performances, many times with commercial sex workers. And these were prolonged and elaborate sexual performances known as freak-offs. And as we reflect on 11 days of testimony so far in this trial, what we want to do right now is break down the most pivotal, bombshell pieces of testimony that I am confident to say the jury will consider when they finally go back into their deliberations. I don't know for sure, but I have to imagine this is what they're going to consider. And remember, this is the prosecution's case right now as we do this recording, so it does lean a bit pro-prosecution. But to do this, I'm not going to do it alone. I want to bring on a special guest right now. I'm joined by Candace Kelly. If you don't know who Candace Kelly is, you should. She is a lawyer. She is a producer. She is an Emmy-nominated reporter and host. She's certified as a domestic violence response team specialist, very important in a case like this. And also, by the way, she even went to school with Sean Combs at Howard University. So Candace, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. It's such a pleasure to have you. I want to ask you, the first thing I wanted to ask you when I knew you were coming on is, since we haven't really spoken since all of these allegations came out, I mean, even from the very beginning, are you shocked at what he's accused of and also essentially what he admits he engaged in, coming from the guy that you went to school with?
Well, it's funny because when I went to school with him, he was the guy who was on campus, which, by the way, we had 1 year that overlapped. He was the guy that was on campus handing out flyers. He was still doing the parties. It wasn't the flyers that we know about today. They were hand-designed flyers. I remember him being on the yard in the center of campus. I am shocked, though I covered his shooting trial in 2001. And I know that after that trial, he changed his name from Puffy to P. Diddy. He started really trying to look at who he was and present it as a person, not Puffy, someone who got mad and got puffed up. He has softened his presentation of who he is over the years. So as the years have gone on, I haven't been shocked, especially looking at some of the things that he has also been taken to court for, whether it's, assaulting a photographer or somebody at his child's game at college. So there are different things along the way that have kind of built up to where we are.
Hey everybody, this is a Law and Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan is stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. And a little bit of a psychology question before we get into the law. I get asked this all the time. If these allegations are all true, particularly what Cassie Ventura had said, and we'll talk about her testimony too, about what she endured, during these private sessions. Is it like an escalation? Was Sean Combs always, again, taking these allegations as true, was Sean Combs always like this? Or do you get to that power, you have that wealth, you have that celebrity, that you got to go to the next thing. You got to go to the next thing. You got to go to the next thing. It's more of a psychology question, but I haven't had a chance to ask that yet. And I was talking about it over the weekend. I thought it was an interesting question to have.
Well, no, absolutely. Listen, I think that when you are someone who has a lot of money and can do everything, right? The jet skiing after a while is not going to be enough, or traveling, to the south of France every other weekend, that's not going to be enough because you have money. You can buy anything that you want. One girlfriend may not be enough, so several girlfriends are a lot. And then let's try this. There's this interesting interview that he did with the late night talk show host, I think it was Jimmy Fallon, and he talked about having an ambulance outside of his home just in case the drugs he took laid him out. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? That's someone who is not only someone who can try a lot of things because they've reached kind of a threshold that you and I haven't hit, but he was preparing for it, had money for an ambulance to be outside in case he went to the other side. So it was interesting to hear him during that interview talk about it, because at that time I said to myself, that's someone who's done it all. That's someone who's trying to get a high far past the high that he's gotten because he has so much money that he has to go so high. He's got to have medical help waiting for him. So I think it's along the way. It definitely wasn't on campus at Howard University.
Yeah, the people look back for the past 2 years at interviews he's done, what celebrities have said, and they're saying, if these allegations are true, what are the clues? Were there any clues that were given? Were there things that we should have noticed? Put that to the side. Now we got the trial, okay? And there was a lot of bombshell pieces of testimony or evidence, and I could probably dedicate 2 hours to everything, because I think everything is quite bombshell, but I kind of narrowed it down. And I want to start and get your perspective on it. I want to start real quick with what I think is a big one that came out yesterday. So we're going to talk more about Kid Cudi in a moment, but essentially he had testified that Combs retaliated against him for becoming romantically involved with Cassie Ventura. This is Combs' ex-girlfriend, the star witness in the case. We're going to talk more about her testimony too, but one of the things he claimed was that Sean Combs or his team broke into his house. Okay, yesterday, the prosecution called LAPD officer Chris Ignacio, who responded to Cudi's home and found some gifts that were unwrapped. And that's kind of like what Cudi had testified about. Thought it was weird. Felt like somebody had been in his house. And then Ignacio testifies he sees this Cadillac Escalade outside the home, runs the license plate, and boom, it was registered to Bad Boy Productions, one of Combs' companies. I thought, Candace, that was a bombshell. No?
Oh, absolutely. I did. Because listen, now you're getting the connecting of the dots. We've heard about this from other people who have testified, right? But now we have actual digital evidence, if you will. He had to look it up in a system. Who did this belong to? It belonged to Bad Boy. That's the enterprise that we're talking about. These are the groups of people that we're talking about. So now I'm a juror. I just want to hear from that driver of the car, right? We still have to go a little bit further, but that certainly was a bombshell because it connected the dots to say Bad Boy was involved. And this is an official record. And now it's kind of different coming from Cassie. It's different than when it came from Capricorn Clark or Kid Cudi. This is from an officer who looked it up and it was on record. Very, very important.
One of the things we've been focusing here on Sidebars, these are such wild allegations. Can they be true? Well, I dedicated a whole episode to this guy named Jonathan Oddie, who shot up a Trump property in 2018. At the time when he was interviewed by authorities, he said he was a sex slave of Cassie and Sean Combs. No one believed him at the time, really. And then all of a sudden, his name has come up multiple times during the course of this trial. Kid Cudi mentioning his house being broken in. Really? Is that possible? Well, this is a pretty big piece of evidence. So now let me talk about this because look, the prosecution, it's very clear what's going on. The prosecution wants to establish that Combs was a leader of a criminal organization, a criminal enterprise that was engaged in this pattern of criminal activity. That's how you get to racketeering conspiracy, this agreement to further racketeering activity to serve one common goal, one common purpose, to benefit Sean Combs. And here, prosecutors need to prove 2 underlying predicate crimes. And there are several that are listed in the indictment. There's sex trafficking, there's kidnapping, there's arson, there's bribery, there's obstruction. But that is why I think Kid Cudi was such an important witness and delivered bombshell testimony. I still think he's one of the most important witnesses who's taken the stand. So he talked about a few things. He talked about that his Porsche was set on fire. We heard testimony yesterday from a fire investigator who responded to that fire, said it was targeted, that a Molotov cocktail was used. So Kid Cudi's testimony helps support the arson predicate crime. His testimony also supported kidnapping, right? Testified that Combs may have kidnapped his employee, Capricorn Clark. We're going to get to her testimony too. Him testifying about a break-in supports the idea of a pattern of criminal activity allegedly conducted by Combs at his request. And by the way, he testified that Combs years later apologized to him for everything, but didn't really get into specifics about what he was apologizing for. But he even described Combs as like a Marvel supervillain when he met him once. Candace, what do you take away from Kid Cudi's testimony? Am I wrong that he might be one of the most pivotal witnesses that's testified so far?
Oh, absolutely. Because here, first of all, we haven't heard from Kid Cudi at all. We haven't heard from him do any interview, do any podcast. This is the first time that he's talking about it.
I will say after Cassie filed her lawsuit, his PR team, right, came out, a representative said, all of this is true, right? So that she had mentioned
yes, that's right.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And then I read that in the New York Times, correct. But hearing it from his voice on Stan, that makes a difference. To hear him color it and talk about the supervillain, to talk about, coming home and getting a phone call from Sean Combs. This was very important testimony to hear it from someone who might seemingly on cross you can't get and say, oh, well, don't you need money? Kid Cudi doesn't need any money. Well, don't you have something in on it for now in terms of what you're trying to get out of it? There's nothing that he wants. He's not dating Cassie anymore. He doesn't need money. And in terms of him just actually talking about it, he had to be subpoenaed to even talk about it. So he's not even looking for 15 minutes of fame. But definitely, when we talk about the pattern of criminal activity, you can actually kind of remove Cassie's testimony here. Inside of his one, sit down testimony, you can actually get, potentially, if you are a juror, those two predicate crimes to create this pattern of criminal activity over the last 10 years. And that's what I found was really interesting for a lot of people who actually, and we'll get to, Capricorn, but even outside of everything else, through just one person alone, you can potentially get to these two predicate crimes in various ways. And I thought that that was very important because if you didn't believe Cassie and you thought, oh, maybe there was a problem with her, of her setting the foundation and everybody corroborating her, he as a standalone kind of works on his own in terms for the prosecution and what they need to prove.
That's a really important point. So aside from the fact that I agree, maybe his status, the way he testified will add to his credibility. I think there were aspects of his testimony that didn't necessarily help the prosecution's case. Like he didn't say Cassie told him that she was repeatedly sexually abused by Sean Combs. I believe he said that she was physically abused, but, him saying, oh, she came to me and said she was sexually abused, that would have been, good testimony for the prosecution, but didn't say that. So, when he doesn't give everything that the prosecution needs, that can make him more credible. But you made a great point. They can get racketeering conspiracy even if the jury doesn't believe that Combs engaged in sex trafficking, right?
That's right. That's right. I thought what was also interesting just in terms of his presentation is that the way he dressed was not like other people who came to the stand. And I thought that added to the fact that he was being as genuine as he could be. He didn't put on a suit. He didn't put on a tie. What I got from him was, look, I have no pretenses. Right? I'm just here to tell the truth, and then hopefully I can go back to my life. And I thought that was very important in terms of the authenticity of his presentation and what he said on stand. But absolutely, talk about glue, talk about eye-opening, and talk about hearing it from his own mouth really made a difference.
Not every time you see a witness show up to court wearing a leather jacket, a white T-shirt, and smoking a cigarette before you jump right into court, coming out of an SUV or an Escalade. It was pretty. It was a cool. Everybody was like, "Wow, that's." They were like, he's cool coming on. But no, I think the way he dresses and presents definitely matters. Okay, so you mentioned Capricorn Clark. I agree with you. More bombshell testimony from her. So this is Diddy's former assistant, testified that Combs basically kidnapped her, right? That's the allegation. Allegedly shows up to her house in LA, allegedly forces her to get dressed, get into a car, go over to Kid Cudi's house, all while she claims that Combs is armed with a gun. So again, supports kidnapping as the underlying charge. Even claims that Combs said to her that he was going to kill Kid Cudi, that she was in that car as Combs and his security went into the rapper's home, that Combs had threatened to kill her if she spoke to police about this. In fact, she claims that he had threatened her before, saying that he would have to kill her if she ever got into contact with Suge Knight again, who she used to work for. That's Combs' rival. And by the way, threats are a key component of racketeering as well. There was another part of her testimony that seemed to support kidnapping, where she claims Combs basically locked her up in a building for days to perform lie detector tests over missing jewelry. She was also yet another person to testify that they witnessed Combs be physically violent with Cassie Ventura. Cassie Ventura fine. For example, she explained she watched as Combs kicked her. And we're going to get to Cassie's testimony because she is victim one in this case. But Combs is accused of using force, fraud, coercion to induce Cassie into sex trafficking. So you have a big witness, bombshell testimony that helps support the sex trafficking of Cassie charge, the racketeering charge. And again, to have racketeering and the claim that Combs uses his staff, his bodyguards, his associates to commit crimes and cover them up, you need people from the inner circle to talk about that environment and what was happening. And, we've already heard testimony from other assistants talk about how this was Combs' kingdom and how they would set up freak-offs and clean up after freak-offs, which, as we know, are key components of the sex trafficking and racketeering counts. But, Candace, am I overstating how important Capricorn Clark was to this case?
Oh, you are not. Talk about a jaw-dropping witness. This was someone, all those boxes you checked off in terms of the threat, in terms of the kidnapping. You've got this theme of guns, not just from her being, her life being threatened so many times along the way, even right at the beginning when she was hired. Definitely makes a difference. And as you said, it lets you into this bigger orbit of Sean Combs's world. It's not just, a driver or a girlfriend. Now we're getting into employees. Now we're hearing from someone who's been there over the years, came back several times, right? And we're getting specifics about how things were handled inside of a business, and someone who was a woman who was not someone that he was sexually attracted to or trying to train up as somebody who was, in a band like Dawn Brashar, right? So this is someone who was absolutely different, could give a perspective, was friends with Sean Combs before she was even hired, thought he was cool. They hung out, and then she was able to tell the jury things change. You got that timeline that we've been talking about earlier. Along the way, it got worse. What she said was Cassie and Sean Combs at the beginning, they weren't doing as many drugs as they are now, but now, or at the time when before this lawsuit, it really got out of hand.
What about her cross-examination?
Her cross-examination was interesting. You mentioned that there was this kidnapping element, that she was taken by security guards and going into a building, an abandoned building, door locked behind her, and not only went in for one day in terms of taking a lie detector test for 3 pieces of jewelry that were stolen, but actually going back home every day and coming back for 4 more days, for a total of 5 days into this abandoned building. Now, on direct, very believable. I mean, she was believable throughout the whole thing. But the cross-examination, though they started out a little rocky, I thought that they did a very good job on kind of opening up this idea that, is it a little ridiculous that you were picked up every single day from your home, got dressed, came downstairs? I've tried to visualize, how did this unfold, and went back to that building every single day for what you're calling, an all-day lie detector test? What could you have been doing 8 hours a day? But here's the thing. She held her ground. But I do think that the defense kind of opened the door to kind of chip away at her testimony. But she held her ground enough, I think.
Yeah, Mark Agnifilo, one of Sean Combs' defense attorneys, really hit on her inconsistent statements, including, there was something whether Combs actually pointed a gun at her. They really hit upon the fact that she came back to work for him despite all of this. Claims that, she couldn't get a job elsewhere in the industry. So it'll be up to the jury to determine her credibility. Now, we got to talk about another bombshell piece of testimony. It came out yesterday. Deontay Nash. Okay, so this is Sean Combs and Cassie's former stylist. And I have to say, I think this is a man who really helped prosecutors with the sex trafficking of Cassie charge, because he claims he saw Combs threaten her, including releasing sex tapes of her. That was a threat that he overheard, that Combs and Ventura would go to hotel rooms all the time with her packing up sex toys for these events. So you have further corroboration that the freak-offs happened. And then he even testified that Cassie told him she didn't want to go, but Combs wanted her to. So it goes to the issue of lack of consent for sex trafficking. Testified he saw Combs be violent with Cassie, including hitting her and kicking her until she started bleeding. He even testified he tried to physically intervene. He didn't report this, though, because he was scared of Combs. Big theme in this case, especially about why Cassie didn't report everything that happened to her as well. And also testified that Combs was physically aggressive with him, too, hitting him, throwing him. Testified that Combs searched his home looking for Cassie, even looking in the oven, which was a bizarre point of his testimony. Candace, what do you think the jury took away from Deontay Nash, and do you think he's credible?
Well, first of all, he's likable, so that's that's a good box to check. A guy some might describe as kind of sassy and someone who knows how to make a good comeback in terms of talking with someone. No skin in the game in terms of, he said that he was not filing a lawsuit, was not a parlor lawsuit. He just wanted to get in and get out. This was definitely someone who made a difference. Again, someone who was inside of the circle of Sean Combs's orbit. They weren't dating. He was someone who was witnessing things that were going on. witnessing the beatings, even jumping in and trying to help Cassie for once. Someone who, as you said, gave this whole idea that at times Cassie did not want to go. But because of the violence, because of the threats, the fact that he brought up this idea that Sean Combs said, hey, you know what, I'm not going to release your music, using that as a threat to keep Cassie in her place. What we got was this theme of power and control that I believe we've seen throughout the whole case. This is someone who knew how to show people that he had power and control, not just over their own orbit, but when we talk about Regina Ventura, for example, I have your mom getting $20,000 alone. So you're not safe here and you're not safe at home. This whole idea of power control has been present throughout this case from day one.
And, we talk about the evidence of lack of consent, but I'll tell you another big piece of bombshell testimony I thought was from Sheree Hayes, the Punisher, this male dancer who was paid to participate in freak-offs with Cassie and Combs on multiple occasions. And he testified that, quote, I didn't get any cues that there was a discomfort with what was going on. It seemed like it was consensual as far as I was concerned. Candace, real quick on that one, I was surprised the prosecution even called him with that statement.
Yeah, but I also think that it shows the power that he had over her. It didn't seem like she was uncomfortable. It didn't seem like she wanted to be there. There was consent. But, that's how sometimes relationships happen. Eventually, she did not consent. And as she said, she felt like it was her job. She felt like it was something that she had to do. So I don't think that it hurt the prosecution at all to know that just kind of in a perfunctory way, this is what she was doing. I'm his sex toy. This is my job, as she said. And let me go ahead and do this because otherwise I will get hurt. He has threatened me. He has threatened people in my circle. Let me go ahead and do what I need to do just to get to the next day.
Well, look, this leads into a larger discussion regarding Cassie herself. Okay, you want to talk about bombshell testimony? She is the star witness in this case. Actually, was able to finish her testimony before she went into labor and just gave birth, by the way. So we talk about the importance of her testifying at the very beginning of this case. Oh, yeah. Now, she testified about being forced to engage in these freak-offs, that she was subjected to really, really disgusting acts that I won't repeat right now, that she had to do all of this for a long period of time, these long stretches of time, including days, these freak-offs, that she even had to do these sexual performances when she was on her periods, that she got UTIs, that she was repeatedly beaten up, physically assaulted by Combs, as documented by video evidence, photographs, other testimony, including from her mom, a former friend, others around her, that Combs controlled all aspects of her career, her finances, basically her life, including his staff keeping tabs on her, tracking her down, that she was given drugs during freak-offs, that he had guns in his homes and forced her to carry one, that he threatened to release sex tapes of her, and that ultimately he raped her. Now, Candace, when we're talking about the elements of sex trafficking and we're talking about power dynamics, and we read the first several pages of this racketeering conspiracy and what the pattern of abuse was towards women, how much did Cassie's testimony, Candace, help this case?
It really established this idea that when you are in a situation where someone is controlling everything that you do, especially being a victim of domestic violence, that you feel trapped. You feel like you can't do anything because this person is controlling everything. What you eat, where you sleep, where you live, the friends that are inside of your circle. When we get to the forensic psychology of it all, someone who is in this type of relationship feels power and control even when they're just walking down the street with them. You go back and you look at these interviews and how she responds when she's in his presence. How is she answering that question? But this dynamic of coercion and force is around her at all times. So I think that she, in her testimony, and it was corroborated already by so many people, is that she was being beaten and treated like a rag doll, as she says, at any turn. It could be at a dinner table with Usher and Neo, and nobody was doing anything, according to her testimony. So, people who were in her circles, nobody really actually helped. And when they tried, actually, we had Deontay, I think that he helped.
But I think he was like the only one, yeah.
Yeah, he was like the only one. But people who tried, they were always told, don't you do it. And they got a warning from Sean Combs.
Right.
So his whole orbit, it wasn't just about her, it was about everybody else. So her setting that foundation was very, very important because so far, everybody has co-signed what she said.
And look, I think, Dawn Richard testifying and saying that she witnessed Combs beat her up, punch her in front of Usher and Jimmy Iovine and Neo, these high-powered people, and nobody allegedly did anything. If the jury takes that as true, an interpretation could be, wow, look at the power of Sean Combs. What do you expect Cassie to do? If they're not going to step forward, what do you expect Cassie to do in terms of reporting or walking away? But having said that, look, Candace, under cross-examination, the defense highlighted messages where she encouraged freak-offs or seemingly encouraged freak-offs, set them up. They tried to say she was jealous, that this was all just a toxic relationship, right? Might be domestic violence, but it's not sex trafficking, that she stayed in touch with him over the years, that she even had one more consensual encounter with Combs after he allegedly raped her. And there was testimony from a forensic psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes, about certain facts that come into play regarding why a victim may stay with an abuser. But doesn't all of that on cross-examination complicate her account?
It absolutely complicates it. It's definitely something, certainly, that the jury is going to be talking about during deliberations. What about these emails and texts? The thing is that we know about how the evolution of a relationship often happens. And I think that both can be true. She was willing. She wanted to satisfy her new boyfriend and being in this particular situation and these freak-offs. But as things progressed and you had these tapes of the freak-offs being held over her head, then it got to feel like she was trapped and couldn't do anything else. Then you add the domestic abuse and the violence. Now she's there. Now it's psychological. Now she's, trauma bonding with her assailant, so to speak. So when we look at it that way, I think that the jury can probably see that both are true. She wanted the freak-offs and perhaps was even trying to satisfy him, but at the same time felt trapped, like this is the only thing I can do. So let me just look at this day by day and figure out how I'm not going to die and protect not only me, but people within my orbit.
I think the two most important pieces of testimony, the two most concrete examples of sex trafficking from her testimony and evidence is the 2016 hotel incident captured on surveillance, right? Combs appears to beat and drag her while wearing a towel. She claims it was after a freak-off. So you have violence, right? Force, a commercial sex act, LA, another location that she was taken for freak-offs. I'm just putting it forward as the prosecution would highlight it. And then the plane incident. He sits next to her on the plane, allegedly shows her sex tapes, threatens to release them, embarrass her. They land. He wants a freak-off. He gets a freak-off. So you have travel, transport, threat, coercion, commercial sex act. To me, real quick, Candace, before we wrap things up, I think if we talk bombshell testimony, those two pieces, arguably the most important, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And what we know from the security guard in that hotel after that video that we all saw was that there was somebody in that room. And even though the defense is going to say, oh, they were just having a lover's quarrel about a cheating incident, there was somebody back in that room that she was being dragged to. Similarly, as you said, if you're showing me these freak-off tapes that I thought you had gotten rid of, well, now I feel like I can't get out of this. And not only that, but we land and you want to freak off right away. I just got the reminder that I better do it because you showed me that and you've told me on more than one occasion, I will let it go to your family and friends and you will be embarrassed and you will lose everything.
Candace Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
All right, good to see you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.